Hello, welcome to A Z Position, a podcast about the world, politics, and everything in between with a Generation Z perspective. I'm your host, Andy Lowe, and today is the first episode of the podcast, so thank you for tuning in. The topic for today of discussion will be the rules of the internet and around social media, the end of the Trump presidency, and so on. Format of the podcast will be we'll begin with a current events discussion, just kind of touching on things to watch out for, and then we will dive right into the main discussion topic. So thank you for listening, and I am pleased today to be joined by my good friend David Stanley.
Hi, Andy.
Welcome to the podcast. Me and David are self-described hyper consumers of news, and we're happy to bring some breaking news and a great discussion here today. So what's happening in the world, David?
Not much. Vaccine rollout is lagging, unfortunately, which is really the only issue that's so pressing that we deal with every day. It's frustrating to see that number not tick up, but obviously understand why it's not. It's good to not compulsively check the news every hour to see what the latest Twitter beef is from the president. Regardless of your views on the past Trump administration, it is nice on some level to not constantly be refreshing Twitter and seeing what's going on there. It's odd to see a president's Twitter account be basically just a highlight of their policy goals. Aside from that, not much going on.
GameStop go burr, right?
Yeah, GameStop.
No, I can't agree more. Honestly, it's weird to think White House statement and just be like whatever. Like it doesn't matter anymore. It's like any previous year where it's just nothingness about policy and the real drama is on the Senate floor. It's a little bit of normalcy already, and we're not even close to where we were before anyway.
Yeah.
So cannot agree more. So yeah, and as far as like things to watch this week. The GameStop thing it's really heated up, but it's right now we're at February 2nd. It's kind of cooled down. Robinhood kind of got a lot of crap for everything that happened. We'll keep an eye on it. I think there's going to be a future discussion on like actual ramifications of what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and how either things can be prevented from happening or if there was actual wrongdoing. I know that's something we've discussed a lot, David.
Yeah, definitely. I have a feeling the SEC is going to be looking into a lot of that. I know that Vlad, the Robinhood CEO, is going to be coming to testify before them. As far as political news, not much. So I believe it was last night, the Senate Republicans, led by Susan Collins, met with the White House for a meeting that ran over, which is always a good sign. So hopefully there's some progress on stimulus. Obviously, $600 billion versus $1.9 trillion is a fair disparity, to say the least. So we'll see what happens, whether that goes to reconciliation. I believe that's pretty much the big political news for the week. Yeah, it feels weird.
It is. It's weird that's like it. There's like it's like a normal debate in like policy stuff. No, it is very pressing. I am very sensitive to the timing of that. I know you are too. I have been, another thing kind of to watch is, does Biden make the space to try and make a compromise and get 60 senators, or do they just shove it through, right? I'm not sure what the right answer is there. Like I could see either argument. There was a study put out today. I need a really good source on that. Forbes posted a highlight. It was posted widely on the news that talked about that it was a third-party study that said that both stimulus proposals with the 1.9 trillion and then 600 billion would return GDP to pre-pandemic levels. It would return to a similar level in the second quarter of 2021, which I thought was very interesting. Now, obviously, disparity is in personal income, even returning to the employment levels we were at. There's a lot of other things to discuss, but that the 600 billion, there is some bargaining room there, and I'm very interested to watch that as well. So keep an eye on that, everybody. Well, thank you for. It's weird the current events being so easy. I guess we didn't do this like right after January 6th, so which that's a whole nother beast in of itself. So, but for today, which slightly related to January 6th, is we are talking about social media, the internet, free speech, things like that. And so, kind of the big context here is January 6th, the Trump era, the 2016 and 2020 elections. What is allowed, not allowed on the internet? What can you say? What can a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit let on their platform, and that's cool or not to the government or to others, which is more important? Uh, how are those rules actually written? When were they written? In fact, it was a long time ago now. And what does that all mean for now? I mean, after following the January 6th attack, as many of you know, Donald Trump doesn't have a Twitter right now, hasn't had one. And it's been kind of good, in my personal opinion. We'll discuss a little bit more. And why there's been this reaction of, the conservative voices being silenced and what is actually happening versus what is being said and how rhetoric gets mixed into all of this. So, kind of the first overarching question I want to start us off with here, David, is, why are, platforms such as Facebook incentivized to create these echo chambers? There's been a lot of news reporting. There's been a lot of reporting over the past 4 years of these like Facebook groups that people go to and they learn about QAnon and with the Oath Keepers and these almost now what we definitely see as extremist groups that peddle conspiracy theories and whether it's the pizza parlor that has a pedophile ring or that they're just stealing the election, that these echo chambers spiral out of control. And Facebook, specifically, I don't mean to libel Facebook. Facebook has been under a lot of scrutiny for this, but other social media companies as well have been under scrutiny for their algorithms. For if they're going to suggest you content, they're probably going to suggest you content that's similar to the ones you've already seen, which means that you're just going to spiral into the same things that you've seen. And so I don't want to just say only Facebook does this. They've been under a lot of scrutiny in particular. But why are they incentivized to do that? How can they do that? Where is that? Well, why is that?
Yeah, so obviously, companies like Facebook and Twitter are publicly traded companies. So, they're responsible to their shareholders. Their goal is to generate revenue and generate value, drive the stock up. Obviously, in addition to their technological goals like connecting people, but obviously bottom lines matter. And so essentially there's two ways that these social media companies in that sphere, like a Reddit or a Facebook or a Twitter, can make money. There's an ad-based model, which means that they essentially loan out a piece of their site for advertisers who then pay them money with the assumption that those ads will be targeted to individuals, and then those individuals will come back to those companies and spend money, and the cycle keeps going, and it's good for both parties in theory. And then there's the subscription-based model, which is something like Skillshare, I think, has something like that, where it's like you pay $10 a month and you have access to all this content. And so right now, there really aren't any social media sites that have a subscription-based policy, which is an interesting thing to think about when you think about the rabbit holes that these companies create. So the problem with the first model, in terms of creating echo chambers, is that you're incentivizing companies to keep people on their sites for as long as possible so that they see more ads. So if you look at like the average ad revenue per user in the US for Facebook, it's about $25 per user per year, which isn't that much. So if you think about it, like $25 divided by 12 months, like $2 a month. So that would be like the subscription value of those users. And then there's obviously more stuff that goes into it. Like there's the Facebook games that people pay way too much money for, like the freemium games. There's that old like South Park episode about like how the Canadian devil makes freemium games. And there's some truth to that. Like it sucks people in that way too. But the majority of their money. Yeah.
I remember that as like a middle school
Definitely.
being a thing, right? Like that was like people, I remember that being way too cool for like 2 years or something. So yeah, no, continue. But I remember that.
Yeah, definitely. Simpler times. But essentially both of the ad-based model and the freemium games essentially have the same effect. Like the more that you suck people in, the more money that they'll spend or the more money that they'll make for the company through these advertising dollars.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great explanation of it, and it's a you would think it's so simple. You're like, oh, that makes sense. They stay on the site, and then now we've seen this like extreme bad end result of it already with January 6th, and like that was, it could have been so much worse, as we've heard way too much about and we'll probably keep hearing about. I think it only gets worse as time goes on. And something I had in my notes here that I think does relate to this, and as we talk about media, so I mean obviously you have social media and you have groups and you have people that just post things, whether it's like my grandpa posting some random shit or like you the typical stuff, right? There's also like news agencies or cable news, whether it's cable news, Fox News, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, or if it's the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune. Something I noted here was that we've had a very big, profound shift in how they report over the past probably 5 years. I mean, people talk about 2015 as really the start, right, in the Republican primaries with Trump. Of this change from like kind of both sides, with this both sidism eroding like real objectivity. And I think it's something that's very real. Is that how do you kind of see that playing into all this, David?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when you think about both sidism, it kind of all, obviously everything these days jumps back to Trump. So it's the same way that we're talking about Facebook making money off ad revenue. A lot of news companies make money off ad revenue. Like CNN is not a subscription-based service, and you can view a lot of Wall Street Journal articles for free. And two examples that pop to the top of my head when you think about that, the thing that Trump unearthed is that all news is good news. Coverage is favorable and driving clicks is positive. And so throughout the Trump era, like, it's good for CNN because they get to kind of have this Trump either objective or Trump bashing, depending on how you look at it, coverage of him. And then something like the Wall Street Journal, like the op-eds generate a lot of clicks, like the one about quote unquote Dr. Biden.
Dr. Joe Biden, yeah.
And like I like the Wall Street Journal. They have great financial reporting, but sometimes that their op-ed section can get in the way of that. And yeah, but to go back to your original question, I think there definitely has been an erosion of objectionality. I mean, I don't think that there's an objective both sides to a lot of the issues we've seen. I would consider myself like a Republican, but someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene is not really defensible. A lot of her comments aren't defensible, and it kind of upsets me when you see someone like Tucker and Hannity with, millions of viewers just go out of their way to defend and somehow turn it back on the other side. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like it's become like rooting for your favorite football team, or in that sense.
Right. Yeah, and that gets back to like I think it's called negative partisanship, where you hate the other side more than you like your side, right? You're not voting really because you like the candidate. And I've had conversations with people where they didn't even vote like in 2020 because they're like, I don't even like either of the candidates, and right, so they didn't participate in the negative partisanship. And to any listeners at home, when we talk about both sidism, it's the act of back in 2016 where you have news sites trying to like the either side has a point when you have like Trump versus Hillary. That's just an example. That's probably different than like necessarily 2020, and there's lots of examples of it, but it's where you try to hold up both sides and give them valid, say they have valid arguments, even if one side maybe doesn't, in the attempt to appear objective. And the fallacy is that a lot of times you end up not being actually objective, because if one side's just wrong because of either facts or evidence, whatever it is, and it could be either side. Obviously, the Trump era, you automatically think of him and that Trump is Republicans and things like that. But there's obviously that's happened both, ironically, both sides of the political spectrum. But the both sidism is the act of trying to equivocate them and give them both a platform. I mean, I think personally, is pure opinion, that the New York Times has fallen ill of that in the past 5 years, which is a very shame. The paper of record, as it was once called and still somewhat is called, has headlines sometimes about a Biden owning a Peloton bike. So like it's just like what is trying to go on here? So that is what we're referring to, and I think it is really related, right? Like I mean, I deal with family members all the time talking about parroting Fox News talking points that don't really make sense, but it gets clicks. All news is good coverage, as you said, and you see that it's the same trend on social media where all attention is good attention, whether it's outrage or just scandalous. I mean, we talk about how many scandals Trump survived that would have tanked any other president, right? He's called Teflon. Is
yeah,
what I always
Teflon
heard, right?
Don.
Teflon Don, yeah. It's just nuts when you put it in the context of the greater, the history of the United States. I mean, if we're really gonna put it in the context, right? I mean, the worst president was probably Rutherford B. Hayes at the end of Reconstruction until just now, when it just doesn't feel real, right? Like, it's crazy. So that's another, you can debate that later on, but
Yeah.
So, and to the point of like incentivization, I mean, what I really think of is it's just ad revenue. I mean, we get back to how do these companies make money, and it's ad revenue, and it's not an easy thing to kind of change, right? Because I mean, I think you agree with me on this. Free market system, great, has lots of advantages, does all these great things, but how do we prevent something that's already had bad consequences? Probably could have bad consequences again. We're already seeing things get blown over. People aren't even actually talking about January 6th. People are in denial. I mean, if they only watch Fox News and go on their Facebook groups, they probably thought they could think Antifa did it for all we know, right? Like, there's no consistent just like truth going out sometimes to certain parts of the population, and we've seen that now. But it's because their sources of information are incentivized to just give them what they want. And you're like, yeah, of course, just give them what they want. But now it's like, oh, crap. Like, this isn't actually good. It's hurt society. And so we got the why is it incentivized? It's just money. So it's how to make money, right? But like, how do we even address that? Like, how do we stop Facebook? Not to even stop, but like I think disincentivize is the right word here. How does it make it where this is something they don't want to actually do, they want to prevent, besides obviously, try not to be liable for criminal suits and with the current system.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and obviously, if we had the answer,
we'd be president, right?
we'd be saviors of the American society. But I think that this has less to do with existing platforms, but I wish that someone would give a whack at a subscription-based service for social media. I think that would be pretty popular, and I think there's definitely a market out there for it. Because if you think about what Facebook, like, outside of paying their engineers, which is, they don't really have a lot of cost. There's server upkeep and stuff like that, but that's really, when you're running a website, that's not super, super expensive. So I think that it would be interesting to see someone try like a Facebook without ads, or maybe, if Facebook even marketed an ad-free experience, and then they could just essentially normalize that by taking the cost adjustments of the ad revenue, and then just having people essentially pay for that. I think that would be a good way to at least begin, because ads are annoying too. I mean, like, as a user, it's annoying to see a bunch of ads, and then you can get into the privacy issues about how scary it is, how Facebook and these ad analytics companies who kind of work in the shadows and people outside of the tech world don't know a ton about, but selling your phone ping data, for example, and then you can almost see if an ad works, because like your phone will ping your location, and then if you got an ad for Dick's Sporting Goods and then you went into Dick's Sporting Goods, like, they know it's a successful ad, and the machine just keeps churning. But as far as changing it, I guess that's my grand idea. Then the problem with that is, how do you implement that in the free market society that we're so fortunate to live in? I don't know. And I just hope that someone who's smarter and more into politics than me, like an actual politician, preferably,
would go about, right? That's what you
would go
mean.
about
Yeah.
would go about finding creative solutions for that, or there's some level of corporate responsibility, which is a huge buzzword, as anyone who's worked in corporate America knows. And hopefully that there could be something to be done about that. But I don't know. I think it would be at least worth a chance.
Yeah, no, I think the subscription model would be a worthy try. I would be interested. I mean, as long as it's not like super expensive, right? I mean, you named a number right there, $2 a month. I'd pay $2 a month. I'd probably pay $5 a month to not have to worry about that stuff. Especially if they get to a point where they can like guarantee your security and they don't mess with ad agencies, right? If they're like, look, we just don't mess with them. That's part of our thing. That's part of the user agreement, and so then they're binded to it as well. People would be into that. I don't know if it'd be as many people as Facebook. Obviously, the whole Facebook works off of volume. That's the whole point. That's why it's $2 a month per person, right? So they're not going to be able to charge that. Um, but I think there would be a market for that. I think that's a good, as far as a free market solution, that's a good one. I'm sure there's people working in the shadows and whether they'll get funding or not. As the hedge fund guys, right? That's it gets to choose all these wonderful things. And so, and as far as like policy, it's you would have to regulate so much to try and do it from a policy perspective. Like if let's say there was a law that was made, right? If we end up talking about Section 230 that currently governs public, social media companies right now, you would have to do so much regulating and have so much bureaucracy on it that it would just kill it. And all the positives that we've had of social media, of just information being able to be shared everywhere and the internet being the internet, would go away. I mean, people talk about that with it was a bill. It was about the child exploitation bill. I can't remember the name of it, but if you look up child exploitation internet bill from the Trump administration, it'll come up, and they sold it it didn't end up passing, but as a way to monitor sexual child exploitation on the internet. But how they did it was you had a committee of like 11 people, majority of who was picked by the federal government, by the Attorney General's office, and they got to kind of set these like best practices that companies had to follow, otherwise they lost legal protection from being like a social media company or a Sony with a PlayStation or Microsoft with an Xbox. And so it really raised these like, whoa, wait a minute, they're gonna like, you get the wrong person in there, they could just tank an industry. I mean, it would blow it all up and snap of your fingers, right? And so I don't know how you do it from a policy perspective as far as echo chambers and everything with social media without doing that. I just don't know. And so I would like to see a subscription model. Like that would be nice. Yeah, if MySpace came back, right, and charged me $6 a month to chill with my friends, not worry about my data going out, it's just not worry about it. Give people peace of mind. They'll pay for that. It won't be the volume, but it'll work. You still want to keep the big open ones, so the various countries of the world that have authoritarian governments. There's a long list. Can still try and get information, right? China, Iran, now Myanmar, African countries everywhere. There's a long list, all right, but that's an important resource for them. So we don't want to just like kill them all. As one argument for not just destroying the current system. So, no, that was good. I didn't even think about the subscription model, David. That was good. And I'd pay a couple bucks a month. I think I know you would too. And I think there's a lot of people at home right now who probably would think about that as well. So. And so kind of the next part of this discussion is, what are the current rules? When we're talking about changing the rules, right, or changing how things are incentivized, what the current rules are really defined by what's called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, or Title V of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which is formally codified as Section 230 of the Communications Act of 1934. So it was an edit to a 30s act. So Section 230, I'm referencing a Wikipedia page right now, like full disclosure, generally provides immunity for website publishers from third-party content. So it's what allows Facebook, if somebody posts, I want to murder Barack Obama, like if they just posted that, Facebook would not be liable for that post. The person who posted it would be, and the FBI would go find them instead of Facebook, right? That's what Section 230 provides. And so it's called Section 230 immunity. And if you see that in the news, that is what they are specifically referring to. And you've seen a lot of discussion on Congress lately of big tech and the immunity in changing when Section 230 gives a company immunity. And so for Section 230 to give immunity, there are three main conditions for it. The first case of immunity is the first condition for Section 230 immunity is that the defendant, in this case if it's a Facebook getting sued because somebody said they wanted to kill the president or some crazy shit, must be a provider or user of an interactive computer service. That's their general term for, again, social media, game consoles, anything, right? Zoom, whatever it is, right? Like somebody has a Zoom meeting and talks about conspiracy theory or something. The second part is the cause of action asserted by the plaintiff must treat the defendant as the publisher or speaker. So this means that the person suing, or if it's the FBI, again, investigating Facebook because somebody posted they wanted to kill the president, that they would have to be asserting that Facebook said that as opposed to somebody else. And that the third condition is the information must be provided by another information content provider. In this case, random user on Facebook, Billy Joe on Facebook said this, not Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook. So that's essentially how Section 230 works. And so in Section 230, immunity is not unlimited. It specifically exempts or accepts, it does not cover federal criminal liability, electronic privacy violations, and intellectual property claims. So if you love watching YouTube and you're watching Twitch or a live stream and they talk about how they can't play certain music because of DMCA violations, that is not covered under Section 230. They are not immune from violating copyright, even maybe if they didn't. There's been lots of other controversy there. But Section 230 does not cover that. And so specifically, Section 230 doesn't cover federal criminal liability. And so, for example, threatening the president does not fall under that. That is a federal crime. You cannot threaten a public official with actual violence or incite violence. We'll get to that in a second. And then the other kind of bit of this is that there is a kind of it's called the Good Samaritan Clause of Section 230. And there's a lot of context, but it's important for if we are going to talk about it, is that a content provider, or not a content provider necessarily, a social media site, and again, that's the best example, is given the benefit of the doubt as if they regulate the content. Example, Twitter takes down the hate speech guy because he said he was going to kill a bunch of people of a certain ethnicity, right? Twitter can take his post down according to their terms of service and still be covered by Section 230 as not being considered a publisher because they did it under good faith, silencing hate speech, stopping incitement of violence, limiting, stopping the transfer of child porn, things like that are federal crimes. So it's called the Good Samaritan Clause, that as long as a computer entertainment company is acting in good faith, that they shall not be treated as a publisher or speaker. And so, so that is Section 230. It's kind of a little bit wordy, but you can kind of see how social media and the internet as we know it has fit into this shell of Section 230. It has been called the words that created the internet for this reason. So, and as we shift to this discussion, this is the law that gives Twitter the ability to ban the now former president and not be considered a publisher of information on their platform. So, a lot of scrutiny has been given here, like how these are the rules basically of the internet, and how can they be changed? Can they be changed to disincentivize Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whoever from creating echo chambers, or how can those things be changed? So, how do you see all this, David? Section 230 good? Do we need to change it? Is this a good rule of the internet? Is this how we do it?
The age-old question. This is one of those rare instances in politics where some reform is wanted by both sides. So, the main proponent of all this is Josh Hawley, and so he's famous for you've probably seen his op-eds, ironically criticizing the media and big tech and all that he links on his Twitter page about how they're censoring conservative voices. And so, really, with what we just talked about with the both sidesism, it's just not true. There's no evidence of that. There's no silencing of conservative voices. I guess the closest thing you could get to that is Twitter suspending Trump, but the truth is that he violated their terms of service. And whether or not you disagree with Twitter's terms of service, that they should be allowed to suspend a sitting president is one thing, but he really did violate their terms of service. So as a private company, they have the right to kick a user off their platform as they see fit. And anyways, going back to Section 230, what Hawley and Ted Cruz is another big proponent, and the Democrats agree, is that there should be some addition or change to Section 230. And so the biggest one is that it's called the Ending Support for Internet Censorship Act that Hawley's introduced. And it's also backed by Speaker Pelosi, which is, it's rare, very rare, obviously. And essentially what it does is it removes 230 protections from company whose services have more than 30 million active monthly users and more than 300 million worldwide, or have over $500 million in annual global revenue, which is kind of a weird kick in because that includes a lot more companies than you would think. So like 30 million active monthly users and 300 million worldwide is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, the big ones. And so they're going to be essentially have their 230 provisions ripped away unless they receive a certification from the majority of the Federal Trade Commission, aka the FTC, that they do not moderate against any political viewpoint and have not done so in the past 2 years. It's the Wikipedia summary. And so what that means is essentially Hawley is knocking out two birds with one stone here, electorally. So he's getting popular 230 repeal, and he can push it as the narrative that he's the defender of conservative voices. And so I think that there does need to be some reform. I don't know that this is the way to do it, but I think a bipartisan effort to at least force a place like Facebook to more heavily moderate a lot of their stuff. I mean, like, it's been well documented that Facebook has been aware of a lot of these groups that have been way past the line of hate speech, which is protected speech under the First Amendment, and it's just incitement of it's not protected speech, and they have an obligation, in my opinion, to moderate that and keep that from keep people from falling prey to that. And so I think that this is a step in the right direction. I think that some action is needed, and it's popular action too. So I think it's more or less a political slam dunk, as far as the politics, and then the real world consequence I think would be good. I think that there does need to be some sort of reform, and I think that there needs to be some form of moderation on the moderation of big tech companies. As much as I love the free market and I diehard free market guy, I think that this is one of those instances where you have sort of an unnatural monopoly on something that should be regulated.
Yeah, actually, I think your last point really kind of hits home there. I mean, a lot of people are rightfully scared that Twitter banning somebody has such an effect, right? That's a private company forcing their terms of service, right? Which makes sense. But the profound effect that has is scary. Like, that's not something to be taken so lightly. I mean, I know when that first happened, I was like, okay, yeah, of course he should get thrown off Twitter for, in my opinion, inciting the violence on January 6th. I think he very much did, right? But the effect of that, of banning a sitting president, and Twitter has since talked about how they would have banned him earlier if he was not the president. Like, they let him, Facebook also, and other platforms have said that they would have banned a private citizen much sooner than they banned him, but he's the president, so it is important that people see what he's saying and tweeting or posting, whatever it is. And so it's scary. Like, it's rightfully scary that happens. Now, I don't think this is a slippery slope to, as Josh Hawley talks about and anytime he speaks ever, that,
1984.
That conservative voices are being silenced. I don't think that's happening at all. He's still tweeting. I mean, him and Ted Cruz are still up there spewing whatever. I could go about that all day, right? Like, so I'm not worried about that at all. I think my counterpoint policy-wise is, there needs to be better regulation here. There needs to be better rules. And I really do think that if we talk about the good, I mentioned the Good Samaritan clause earlier, the clause that says as long as a platform is acting in good faith, that they get the immunity, right? It's kind of, they get the benefit of the doubt. I think that is the point to change. If you reform the Good Samaritan Act or the Good Samaritan clause to a specific set of rules, and those rules could include that they are not, that they are moderating hate speech, but they can't moderate non-hate speech, or that there has to be clear lines of, you know, things that are illegal or things that are considered moderatable without, you know, whether it's, if it's something that's grotesque, let's say it's porn, like a platform can decide whether they want to have porn on their site or not, right? Like that's fine, that totally makes sense. Yeah. And so, but those lines should be drawn by Congress, our democracy functioning, right? And I think that's something that could also pass. Now I'm also open to the idea of this bipartisan bill you mentioned. And I think that would work well. I'm not a big fan of putting bureaucracy in it if we don't need to. Personally, I guess the libertarians back home are cheering, right? But it would just it would end up in the courts. There's a lot of court decisions upholding Section 230, and so those would be revisited. Those would end up in the Supreme Court, and there would be decisions about the new interpretation of a new Section 230. But I really think that Good Samaritan clause is what has allowed this it's this wide range of enforcement or moderation, and how different companies moderate, and if that's okay or not, and that makes people uneasy. They don't, they want it consistent. Normally if you go out and you say you're protesting or whatever, you know what you can and can't say. If you say something or do certain things, you get arrested, right? Like, we have clear rules there. We need clear rules in the internet space as well, and I think that's what's been really missing. It would really benefit. Now, I'm not a politician. I don't have like these specific rules written out by a lawyer, but something around, what can and can't be moderated, whether it is that you have to have a terms of service that abides by these certain rules. You could do that as well, and then you just enforce the terms of service, right? It could have an exemption clause for certain for elected politicians, that if you agree that Twitter should have let Trump stay on there for longer than a normal citizen, which I think there's an argument there, right? But you could put all that in the rules of Section 230 and then have that be enforced. So that would be my counterpoint. Not that a bipartisan effort wouldn't be good. The irony of Pelosi and Hawley voting yes on the same bill would just be wild in and of itself, considering what's going on. Hawley and Cruz. Anyway, and there's others too, but they're the big names I always think of, obviously. And so that's what I've thought of as well. That was the first thing I thought of, was that was reform the Good Samaritan clause.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there needs to be a clear line in the sand, because that there is legitimate criticism on the right of Twitter in saying, well, you deplatformed Trump, but someone even I'm just like on Twitter right now, like Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, still has a Twitter. He said some even crazier things than Trump all the time. Yeah, he
said some pretty wild shit down there
on Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, there's him. There's Chinese actors, like official Chinese actors, that just spread baseless stuff still around. Iranians still on there. I mean, there's a lot of folks that frankly need to be deplatformed, so that for the good of, and the same reason why Trump was. I mean, if you're going to make that argument, I think that's definitely valid, and that goes back to what you're saying about how there needs to be a clear line in the sand as to what is and is not acceptable on these platforms.
Yeah, and that's you made a great point there, that it is a very valid argument. I think right after it happened, and there was a lot of attention put to the supreme leader of Iran, who essentially actually been deplatformed. Actually, right after, it was a couple of days later, he got deplatformed. So, but Chinese state actors still on there. Bolsonaro was actually kind of a deep cut. I actually appreciate that. That is actually a good point.
He was the first person that jumped to mind. I was like, I think he's still on Twitter.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. That's a good one. I mean, like the Kremlin. I mean, if we're really going to talk about it, you got Russia over here. Other current event here, little deep cut here. Alexei Navalny is being detained for being a political dissident. It's really good times in Russia right now. So another thing to keep an eye on. But they haven't been deplatformed, and so that's a valid criticism. And that's what is a result of not having a clear line in the sand, that we so desperately need now. It's nice that our president isn't exacerbating that. Biden just like tweets about his executive orders and how we need to like stop yelling at each other, and that's fine and all, and that his meeting with the Republicans went over. Like, it's all real benign stuff. It's great. But this is gonna happen again. Like, this isn't going away. I mean, was it Congress is in the process of possibly, or not even possibly, trying to remove Marjorie Green Thomas? You have to. Is it
Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Marjorie Taylor Greene, thank you, or MGT as I affectionately refer to her in any time I text. Similar, AOC. I don't, I use acronyms everywhere. Don't worry, but they're rightfully, I think, trying to strip her of committee positions for just, there's quotes of her talking about Jewish lasers setting fire to California. I mean, like, there's some wild stuff going on there, and so like, what do you we already have to address this again. I mean, it's not going away yet, and I think the clear line in the sand's the answer. So no, and that's good. So well, yeah, do you have anything else for our discussion here, David? On Section 230, things lingering on your mind, about the past fucking month of madness.
Not about Section 230. Always got
I know, right?
Always got stuff lingering, but
yeah, I know. We'll get there. We gotta zoom in on topics here. So, and so to end the episode, and I'll do this for each episode a little bit more lighthearted. I got a period of history, and hopefully David knows at least something about this period in history. It's a softball one to start the podcast. And I want a hot take. I want like a okay, but sure, buddy, take here. And the period is World War I. I'll give you a second. I think for me, my hottest take is that the division, how it ended up in the Middle East, and this isn't super hot, but let me finish this point. It was divided up between Britain and France and whatever after the Ottoman Empire fell, which is in all that, and the end of the war. But the hottest take for me is that they really weren't super in the wrong. Like, there's a lot of people who talk about how like that was like super Western colonialism, and there's a lot of talk about that in popular media and any political science journal. There's a lot of talk about that. I'm not gonna like specifically call people out or anything. But for me, whenever I read about that history and like the end of that war, the Ottoman Empire fracturing, the Ottoman Empire had existed since 1453. Okay, Columbus hadn't sailed the freaking ocean blue yet, and the Ottoman Empire existed. Okay, so this is 500 years almost of history, and this empire existed almost similar to how it was. It hadn't changed a lot, and so then it fell and fractured and all these things. And so, while Britain and France, hindsight's 2020, Britain, France, all the other players there, specifically Britain and France, could have handled it better. Agreed. What else were they gonna do? I don't know. Nobody's told me what else they were gonna do, and I haven't heard any. Yeah, I still know. And obviously, there's a lot of the history that's come from that is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Jewish zone versus the Arab zone of what is now Israel, and then also of the West Bank. And again, whenever I read about that history, it's like, what else were they gonna do? It was gonna descend into pandemonium. There was like 5 civil wars trying to brew in different parts of the Ottoman Empire once it fell. It was being held by an iron grip. And so I don't know what else they do to try and just stop bloodshed, So yeah, that's my hot take. It's not that bit of colonialism like wasn't really that bad to me, at least. I could be wrong though. Somebody could prove me wrong. I will admit that.
That's just one of those where I think people, since isolationism is like the flavor of the past 4 years on both left and right, it's like kind of akin to populism. That's just a slam dunk that people always point to. But I agree. I don't think it's as clear cut as like, this is somehow the fault of Western nations. I don't think it is. That's a good take. All right. So this is kind of pandemic tangential to World War I, but history is very cyclical. That's not a hot take. We know that it is, but I was thinking about how there's the Spanish flu towards the end of World War I. And so one of the main spreaders, if you look back, is is parades at the end of World War One. And there's enough scientific data at the time that people knew it was a bad idea to have those parades. But there's obviously also like the social cost of not having a parade for, the soldiers who were in the trenches, possibly the worst type of battle there was. But it's just interesting to think about how it's so cyclical and how we still have these issues to this day about balancing social good versus human life, essentially, and where the line is versus free action and movement and curbing the spread of something. So history definitely repeats itself. It's my World War One hot take, but
Yeah, no, I didn't even think about that. It was 1918, and it just ended. I think V-Day was November 1917, right? Oh gosh, that's crazy. And actually, the first thing I think of is the French, because the French, everybody talks about the French and surrender flags, whatever. The thing with the French is in World War One, they were essentially removed from Napoleon and him almost like conquering Europe. These were a proud, hardy people who could fight, and they fought hard in World War One. If you look up any of the French exploits, they easily took the hardest hit in World War One. They were beaten, battered, killed, blown up, and they held the line for a long time. The Maginot Line was one of the most epic, like just installations of forts ever seen in the world, and there's a lot of history there. And so you're gonna tell me, if I was a French soldier and I somehow survived, I was like the one of 8 people that survived, right? Then I come home and like, oh no, you can't have a parade for the just hellscape you just survived because of this disease that's starting to spread, whatever. And I have some empathy for that guy, right? Coming back, and I'm sure that's what happened. Is that they're like, how can we not? We just went through literal hell on Earth. You're gonna tell us not to celebrate that we survived and won and all this? And so, yeah, the human cost, social costs, both? Question mark.
yeah. I got another fun fact about the 1918 pandemic too while we're on it. So it's called the Spanish flu, right? So you would assume it originates in Spain. Incorrect. It's from China. So another
Really?
bit of cyclical history. Yep.
They
They found that out about 6 years ago.
Oh, they had just traced it back to
Yeah.
China.
Yeah.
So it took them 100 years.
Yep.
They're almost 100 years to actually figure out.
Yeah,
where
to
it came
figure out
from.
where it came from.
Wow.
Yeah. So China has been the epicenter of the 2 most deadly pandemics of the past 100 years. Fun fact.
That's and I don't like correlation doesn't prove causation.
Yeah,
It's so
not
interesting
at all.
because China in 1918 was very different than China today. Oh my gosh, that is a whole nother bit of history there. Boxer Rebellion, the Japanese were starting to do bad things. Yeah, but that is wow. There you go. That's a good trivia there. Thank you, David. Oh, well, with that, I want to thank David for coming on here for a great discussion. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, no, we will definitely do this again. Not 100% sure on the next kind of in-depth topic. It might revolve around It'll probably revolve around Wall Street, but stay tuned. And thank you for listening to a Z Position. Thank you.